Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 28, text number 4. Ahimsa satyam asteyam yavan artha parigraha brahmacharyam tapakshaucham svadhyaya purusharchana ahimsa satyam asteyam yavad artha parigraha brahmacharyam tapakshaucham svadhyaya purusharchanam. Ahimsa satyam asteyam yavad artha parigraha brahmacharyam tapakshaucham svadhyaya purusharchanam. Ahimsa satyam asteyam yavad artha parigraha brahmacharyam tapakshaucham svadhyaya purusharchanam. Ahimsa, non-violence. Satyam, truthfulness. Asteyam, refraining from theft. Yavat artaha, as much as necessary. Parigraha, possessing. Brahmacharyam, celibacy. Tapaha, austerity. Shaucham, cleanliness. Sva-adhyaya, study of the Vedas. Purusha archanam, worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Translation: one should practice non-violence and truthfulness, should avoid thieving, and be satisfied with possessing as much as he needs for his maintenance. He should abstain from sex life, perform austerity, be clean, study the Vedas, and worship the supreme form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Purport. The word Purusharchanam in this verse means worshiping the Supreme Personality of Godhead, especially in the form of Lord Krishna. In Bhagavad Gita, it is confirmed by Arjuna that Krishna is the original Purusha, or personality of Godhead, Purusham Shasvatam. Therefore, in yoga practice, one not only must concentrate his mind on the person of Krishna, he must also worship the form of the deity of Krishna daily. Paragraph. A brahmachari practices celibacy, controlling his sex life. One cannot enjoy unrestricted sex life and practice yoga. This is raskaldom. So-called yoga so-called yogis advertise that one can go on enjoying as much as one likes and simultaneously become a yogi. But this is totally unauthorized. It is very clearly explained here that one must observe celibacy. Brahmacharyam means that one leads his life simply in relation with Brahman, or in full Krishna consciousness. Those who are too addicted to sex life cannot observe the regulations which will lead them to Krishna consciousness. Sex life should be restricted to persons who are married. A person whose sex life is unrestricted in marriage, a person whose sex life is restricted in marriage is also called a brahmachari. Paragraph. The word asteyam is also very important for a yogi. Asteyam means to refrain from theft. In the broader sense, everyone who accumulates more than he needs is a thief. According to spiritual communism, term Prabhupada liked, one cannot possess more than he needs for his personal maintenance. That is the law of nature. Anyone who accumulates more money or more possessions than he needs is called a thief. And one who simply accumulates wealth without spending for sacrifice or for worship of the personality of Godhead is a great thief. One more. Svadhyayaha means reading the authorized Vedic scriptures. Even if one is not Krishna conscious and is practicing the yoga system, he must read standard Vedic literatures in order to understand. Performance of yoga alone is not sufficient. Narottama Das Thakur, a great devotee and acharya in the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, says that all spiritual activities should be understood from three sources, namely saintly persons, standard scriptures, and the spiritual master. These three guides are very important for progress in spiritual life. The spiritual master prescribes standard Vedic literature for the prosecution of the yoga of devotional service. And he himself speaks only from scriptural reference. Therefore, reading standard scriptures is necessary for executing yoga. Practicing yoga without reading standard literatures is simply a waste of time. And there's a lot of people wasting time. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chakshunamiritam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Sri Chaitanya Mano Bhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Svapadantikam. Kapila's Instructions on Devotional Service, Chapter 28. Here, in this verse, we're hearing the characteristics of one who's practicing. It's subordinate principles to sadhana. And the sadhana of dhyan yoga. Because as we heard yesterday, this dhyan yoga, or practice of meditation upon the supreme form of the Lord within the heart, this dhyan process leads one to the path of realization of Bhagavan, or the realization of the absolute truth in full. And one who follows it properly, of course, then there's people that don't follow it properly. But those that do follow it properly, it's a preliminary to, it leads to devotional service. In one sense, it's devotional service. Man mana. That's the first part. And that's what's being described. Then bhava mad bhakta. So they're not yet full-fledged bhaktas, but they're the preliminary stage to becoming bhaktas, because manmana, they're engaging their mind in thinking of the personality of Godhead. So the verse is describing the rest, meaning the mind is when the mind is in proper order, the mind gives direction to the senses. In some person's case, the mind is not in proper order. They become disoriented or misdirected. And therefore, the senses are not aligned with that which is pleasing to Krishna, or that which is in accord with the scriptural indication. The scriptural indication means that Krishna is to be pleased. Ultimately, that's the purpose behind the regulations of Scripture. Like, for example, in this little list, the short list, it's not comprehensive, but just some items. The brahmacharya, what's the purpose? And in one sense, the purpose is by controlling the sense organ, the genital, it assists in controlling the mind. Or say it the other way, without controlling the genital, one mind can't be controlled. One can't be a yogi, because yoga means keeping control of the mind. And one can't keep control of the mind if one can't control the genital. So one impacts the other, and vice versa. If one wants to come to the stage of performing brahmacharya properly, then there has to be a purpose. Otherwise, the impulse born of the modes of material nature is not going to happen. It may happen voluntarily or involuntarily for some time, but the impulse is there in every body that takes birth, and everyone that's born has a body. So there's such an impetus. Why is there such an impetus? It's the propagation of a species. The world goes on because one generation produces the next generation. And that's the organ of generation is the genital. And so it's needed. It's just part of the makeup of Prakriti for propagation of the species. So it's an impetus. Now, refraining, this is another point. Refraining may be suited for those who are brahmachari, and then there are those that it would be artificial or unrealistic or not practical for someone who has that urge and they can't control that urge, and therefore there's the process of marriage, and in the process of marriage there's regulation. And as Prabhupada is writing here, it's something he commonly said with a little more detail, but sex life should be restricted to the persons who are married. A person whose sex life is restricted in marriage is also called the brahmachari. So he coined this phrase, brahmachari grihastha, which is, by terminology, it's in contradiction to one another. But it's indicating in the grihastha life, maintaining the standard for grihastha life and being controlled or regulated by that standard, regardless of anything else. And that means for the purpose of propagation and not otherwise. Because that's the God-given impetus for the genital of male and female is propagation. So when there's for the purpose of propagation, and then there's standards and regulations when it is propagation, and otherwise no. So it's the point is not stopping the senses, but purifying the senses. And by purifying, one may, and the design is one will become free from that urge. Doesn't mean the urge stops, but the urge is superseded by something higher. That higher taste is the higher taste of using all the senses, including the mind and tongue and other senses, in devotional service. And when that satisfaction is achieved, then it's then very natural way to control the lower urges. It controls the lower urges effectively. So, in other words, bhakti has the power to supersede all regulation. The supersede all regulation doesn't mean now I'm fixed in devotional service, I can do whatever I like. Rather, it means now that I'm fixed in devotional service, there's no need for external and extra efforts beyond the power of bhakti, because the allure of senses and sense objects is faded and gone. Rather, the senses and sense objects are meant for Krishna's service. And that's so strong and so attractive that there's regulation falls away. When regulation falls away for such a person, it doesn't mean they indulge. It just means it's a little bit like trainer wheels on a bicycle for a little boy that's learning how to ride a bicycle. They may not, but they have a system where there's two little wheels on either side, and the young child learns to ride a bicycle with training wheels, and after some time they don't need the training wheels anymore. They can ride their bicycle just fine without it. So, similarly, these restrictions or control of the mind and senses in the regulative stage, they're not essences, but they assist in reaching the essence. The essence is Krishna is to be pleased. So one does or doesn't do something based upon Krishna being pleased or not being pleased. And so that the control is a subset of bhakti. The regulation is a step in the direction of bhakti. It's not the essence of bhakti. And same for all of these points. We'll go through them as Prabhupada has done. He starts with deity worship, Purusharchanam. Archana means worship, and worship of whom? Worship of the Supreme. The tendency to worship someone, which is of a living entity, is someone who's powerful, someone who's a community leader, someone who's a national leader, someone who's a whatever it is, a sports hero or something, and there's accolades extended to that person. They're honored. Yad acharati shreshtas, because they're particularly shrestha, qualified in some area or another area. And the ideal for someone that's in that position is they're serving the interests of their subordinates. Ideally, the king is serving the interests of the citizens, and the actions taken, the decisions taken, followed by the actions of the king, are under the guidance of Scripture with the right purpose. The citizens are to be, the well-being of the citizens is to be upheld. And that's a good king, a good leader. And unfortunately, the modern system is not qualified king, but the modern system is popular vote. And while they may have some mix of national interest or some community interest or whatever interest, a major force operating is a selfish force, and the selfish force allows for freedom to do whatever my selfish interests dictate. Unfortunately, that's the program. Without going into the modern politics, it's just there's a selfish interest in the part of a candidate who's becomes the leader by popular vote, and that spoils their leadership capacity. Because they make decisions and take actions based on those decisions with self-centeredness, not the well-being of the citizens. So something that assists substantially is this deity worship, because what's the purpose of being someone, being a leader, being a parent, being a community leader, being a head of state, being a teacher? It's the well-being of the dependents under the guidance of Scripture, what that well-being looks like and how it's to be administered. That's when one is trained in the principle of service. So the principle of service unto the Supreme is particularly accomplished through deity worship. At least that's a design, an intention behind it. There's regulations, and therefore one does this and doesn't do that according to regulations. Cleanliness, and what does cleanliness look like, and then that's spelled out. So, because it would be displeasing to the Supreme. Or another example, a common example that's often given, is when the worship of the deity is there, but the lack of respect to living entities, it's not pleasing to the deity. So the deity worship is compromised. Not even if one is a fastidious follower of all the regulations of deity worship, if there's not proper friendship and friendly disposition and proper service to other living entities besides the supreme living entity. And one of the ways that that's accomplished is by distribution of prasadam, somehow or another, this way, that way. And then the other activities besides the prasadam activities, seeing the parts and parcels of the Supreme as the living entities are part of the Supreme, and rendering favorable service according to the codes of Scripture, what's beneficial for those living entities. Without that, so say it negative again, without that contemplation, it's not deity worship. Then positive, when that contemplation is there, then deity worship becomes pleasing to the deity. So although deity worship is, in one sense, directly the deity in you and the process of serving them, it extends beyond you and the deity in the process of serving them. It extends to all living entities. Starting with the Vaishnavas, and then there's varieties of other living entities that aren't Vaishnavas, but they're parts and parcel of the Supreme. In other words, deity worship is very broad. It's specific and focused. At the same time, it's also very broad. And in these chapters, like this chapter, deity worship takes a very prominent role. And deity worship, as being described here, is in the process of meditation, not a Hare Krishna devotee doing deity worship. It's the activity of one who's not there yet, but they're doing They're doing dhyan, meditation upon the super soul or the Supreme in that form. So within the mind, dhyan. But then the practical is also recommended. And so for each of these other terms. Brahmachari we touched on. Asteyam, refrain from theft. Then there's the narrow and there's the broad definition of theft. The narrow is something is the property of someone else, and by intention or otherwise, what was someone else's property, you try to make your property. That's theft. Not honoring each living entity has given a quota. That's like Ishopanishad. One is entitled to accept one's quota, and you're not entitled to accept that which is the quota of others. You can't encroach upon the property of others. That's theft. And then a broader one than that narrow one, and very obvious theft, is I don't encroach on others' property per se explicitly, but I accumulate and accumulate and accumulate. No, by my accumulating, or a number of persons accumulating, someone's being deprived because there's a quota for everyone. And someone's being deprived if I accumulate and hoard unnecessarily. So then comes a big question. Where's the line? What's necessary? And when have I crossed the line? Is there a bell that rings or something? How do I know? And there's the plus and minus. The standard explanation for the plus is it's sustainable. Minimize, but at the same time, whatever that minimized, it's sustainable. And I don't have to go way up and then way down, way up and way down. But it's a consistent requirement. Whatever that, and someone's requirement maybe way up there, and someone else's requirement may be somewhat lower, and someone else's requirement is somewhat less. Like a classic example is Sudama Brahman of Avantipur. And he was impoverished. His body was skinned, his bones were sticking out in his ribs, and his wife was concerned about his safety. But he liked. He didn't have much needs. He didn't want more than the little bit that he had. Anyway, when the whole pastime was over, and he came back, and there was Krishna supplied a palace instead of his little cottage. He still lived in a very simple way. He didn't become extravagant. Now that I've got a big palace. It was, the Bhagavatam describes he continued sleeping on the floor and doing the things that he was doing before he had opulence, because his necessities were quite simple. And his necessities were simple because that suited him. He could sustain it, maintain it. Another person couldn't survive. They would die if they had the circumstance that he had. They wouldn't be able to. So sustaining and stabilizing a standard of what my needs are, one's needs are. That's important. And then whatever that is, striving, recognizing what it is and maintaining that standard, striving to reduce the necessities when in fact what's necessary for the soul. But what's necessary is for the body and mind, and so one does those. But as spiritual life progresses, dependency on the temporary subsides, because one becomes filled with the eternal. That's spiritual progress. Gradual. And so back to the not stealing. Asteyam. Don't take more than required. Okay, that's a nice idea. What's required? How do I determine that? And so I've been addressing that which I need. And being honest with what one's need. Do I need this? Do I need that? And the other thing. There's a devotee that had a tendency to accumulate. Nice devotee. His name was Ladini Shakti Das. And he had a tendency to accumulate. So ritually, once a year, he lived in the ashram, and he spread out all of his stuff and selectively kept only that which he required, and then purposefully gave that which he didn't require to someone else. And it was an annual thing because he still had the tendency to collect more than required. And he knew it. But he was being cautious about that tendency, even so going forward in time, and then in an annual basis, just give stuff away, the unnecessary stuff. Now, of course, what he kept as necessary, who knows if it was really necessary. When someone has an accumulating propensity, they might consider something that's not necessary as necessary. I won't mention his name, but one godbrother recently moved from place X to place Y. And it was astonishing to him how much stuff he had. And to go from place X to the place Y, they had to rent a moving vehicle. They hired somebody to move their stuff. And he gave a lot of stuff away because it wasn't necessary. Let's see if in the new place he's going to start accumulating again. But it's a tendency. So it's a principle. The principle that's being described is a principle for practicing yoga effectively, because accumulating more than required is an impediment to the mind and to the senses. Keep it simple. Not Spartan, but keep it simple. And what is I can sustain? I can live happily with X instead of 3X, and live happily with it, and stay with X instead of bumping it up. I'm pausing because I heard this interesting story. I'll tell the interesting story. It's a colloquial story from Maharashtra. And there's a little saying in Hindi that goes with this little story. So the story goes, there was a grahastha. He reached a certain stage of his life. He thought it was an ideal thing to do to enter vanaprastha life, not by divorcing his wife or abandoning his wife, but placing his wife in the care of someone. And he would then go off to Vrindavan and associate with sadhus in Vrindavan. So he officially retired from his family life, and he went to Vrindavan. And while he was in Vrindavan, you can say he still had unfulfilled material desires, because he would sit and hear Bhagavad Gita, and as he was hearing Bhagavad Gita, he felt, I'm not doing anything with my hands. I could engage my hands in some service that would help me fix my ears in hearing. So he got this bright idea of using his hands during class to make ghee wicks, which is a nice service for the deities. And at the time, making ghee wicks required having cotton, and having cotton at that time, there was cotton seeds inside the cotton. So he'd have to remove the seeds and then have some ghee and make ghee wicks. And he found it would help him to by keeping his hands occupied to engage his ear in hearing. And he practiced it till he got to the point where, even including removing the seeds during class, he could make 100 ghee wicks in 1 hour. And then a person saw this, and he was consistently making 100 ghee wicks, and said, why don't you start a little business? So he thought that was a nice idea. So he started a little business. And after some time, someone else said, why are you living alone like this? You should get married and get a wife. So he got married and had a little business in Vrindavan, making ghee wicks and selling them in his ghee wick shop. So the intention, he did full circle. His intention was detachment from family life, but he ended up in family life because he didn't control his mind and senses. But doing something that's meant for Krishna service means to do something that's meant for Krishna service. And that's bhakti. And bhakti has the power to attach one to Krishna and detach oneself from Maya. But if the purpose of serving Krishna is missing, then it's not effective. Detachment is ineffective. So that's on the topic of theft, taking property of someone that doesn't belong to you, or not understanding everything belongs to Krishna and I have my quota. Exactly as Ishopanishad says, accepting things that are allotted to him, but not accepting other things, knowing well to whom they belong, and that whom is Krishna. And then Swadhyaya, that's the final one. It's Swadhyaya organization. It's like that's their thing. Is they like studying. So it's kind of like a Gyani club. It's not intended like that, but it can become like that. Cultivation of knowledge of Scripture. Scripture is imperative, not optional. And taking shelter of Scripture gives friendly guidance and direction from A to Z, depending even different types of Scripture, but the purpose of achieving attachment to Krishna, while it may very well be while fulfilling this desire, that desire. But so the operative point, one more time, Swadhyaya, is that Krishna is to be pleased. And beneficial, or hopefully one understands that the purpose of this, the purpose of Scripture, is that Krishna is to be pleased. The purpose of Scripture is to know Krishna. And Krishna can be known through the medium of devotional service. It's simple. So Swadhyaya, with the right guidance and indication, because there are people that don't take shelter of, that's the concluding point of this purport, they don't take shelter of Scripture, and they're doing some kind of practice. And it's guaranteed, it's from the beginning it's misguided, and it'll become more misguided over time through association and the lack of shelter in Scripture. So it's imperative for not only for a Hare Krishna devotee, but anyone that's on the spiritual path. Svadhyaya, careful study of Scripture and living one's life according to what the teachings of Scripture are, and that's through the medium of a spiritual master. So there's a little list in chapter 28, text number 4, describing this preliminary stage to devotional practice. Any discussion? Okay, here comes the microphone.
Swadhyaya reminded me of Bhagavad Gita shloka where it helps in controlling the mind. Mana prasada saumyatvam maunam atma vinigraha swadhyaya abhyasanam chaiva.
Yeah, same verse, same
word.
Manasam
Uchyate.
Same. Behind you.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. You were talking about the importance of deity worshipping. Sometimes I feel like some devotees feel like, oh, as long as you chant Hare Krishna and go for Harinam, we shouldn't pay too much attention to the. I mean, as far as following the deity etiquette to a very strict degree. Is there any fault in that? Is there any danger in that? Or even I myself, sometimes I kind of see it that way to some degree, to be honest with you. So please correct me if I'm wrong.
There's no fault provided. This is a conditional no fault. Conditional no fault provided the absorption in the holy name is strong, not just an activity, but shelter is very strong. If shelter is not very strong, then one is going to remain on the material platform, thinking specifically in terms of the body as the self. One of the benefits of deity worship, explicit benefits of deity worship, is to apply the bodily conception to a spiritual form and spiritualize the conception portion of the mind. It has that effect, it has that potency. So the answer to your question, my answer to your question, there may be others that answer differently. My answer to your question is it's provided there's a genuine shelter in the holy name, that's sufficient. Then what's the criterion of is it sufficient? That depends on then the quality or the absorption, not just figuratively, but literally absorption in the holy name.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. Thank you for this class. I had two doubts. So the first is that I wanted you, because you mentioned that practicing Dhyan Yoga correctly might culminate into devotional service. So I'm not really understanding that point. How does it exactly lead to devotional service?
If and only if the preliminary has the opportunity to hear the topics of Krishna. The Shravanam process is not optional, or the Shravanam process is sufficient. It can carry the one who's practicing what's described here, Dhyan Yoga, to the stage of Bhakti Yoga. It's the hearing. With or without makes it can progress to bhakti or won't.
And this is similar to my next doubt, because it mentions that like in devotional service we hear the importance of Guru, Sadhu and Shastra. So in this purport, Srila Prabhupada makes it clear that even if one is not Krishna conscious, they should be reading these scriptures. So my question is, how does the concept of Guru and Sadhu fall into these other yoga practices?
Well, they don't. Because, a real guru or real sadhu is one that reminds you of Krishna. And they bring you to Krishna through sound. So supposing somebody doesn't have Guru and Krishna, but they have Scripture, because the Scripture means that which comes from Narayana, the personality of Godhead, it's purifying. Even my intention may not be purification. My intention may be something else. Let me get progress on the path of material enjoyment. And I understand that can come from Scripture, so I'm going to study Scripture. Scripture is purifying for such a person. It may take a long, long time, but it's purifying. If they have that affinity or training and attachment, then, and in the course of time, Krishna may send to such a person, here's a sadhu, please associate with them. Okay.
Thank you, Guru Maharaj.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. This is from Shari Devidasi, and it is yesterday's question came very late. And she says, it says in the purport of 328.3, such religious practice referring to transcendental devotional service is never hampered by any impediments. Guru Maharaj, how to understand this? Because sometimes we come across some impediments in different ways, even though after understanding the value of devotional services and trying to execute it just to please Guru and Krishna with satisfaction without expecting any material benefit.
Well, the premise of the question is in question. And, a feature of the premise of the question is there's nothing material can serve as an impediment. No, impediments do come from material by definition. But there's no obstacle that can check the flow of devotional service. Ultimately, that's the statement. So the premise of the question is, my sense is it's misquoting something that Scripture says, or misunderstanding what Scripture says. Ahaitukiya pratyataya yatma suprasidati. That's Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 2. And so that verse is saying there's nothing material that can start and nothing material that can stop. It doesn't say no impediment. Impediments there. It's like a river flowing downstream. There can be rocks. There it's an impediment, but the river flows around the rocks. And in course of time, the rock gets worn away by the river. It's an impediment. There may be impediments, but nothing can stop the flow of the river, and nothing can stop the flow of devotional service. There's nothing material that has the power to stop the flow of devotional service. Now, are there impediments? Just like, her illness, she's not able to do certain things, but it doesn't stop the flow of devotional service. It cannot, though, because devotional service isn't impelled or checked by anything material. You can't start it or stop it with something material. Impediment, yes. Stop, no.
There is a follow-up question on this. Is there any connection between these impediments and our own past karma? If so, how to rectify it if our devotional service is hampered by impediments?
Well, it depends.
Okay, thank you. This is another question in YouTube also. It's also from Shari.
From whom?
From Shari De.
Okay. It's from this morning or yesterday?
This morning. This
Okay.
morning, says, Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, you mentioned about importance of deity worship, and you mentioned in short and broader sense its blessings for all. Could you please explain it one more time if it is okay?
Well,
Also,
Yes.
it says especially in temple and house settings.
Okay, but there's I'm living in my house. I'm a grahasta living in my house, and I have a deity in my home, and I'm worshiping the deity. And in my worship of the deity, it's all about me and the deity, and I'm not thinking about others should also be pleased. The scripture says that's not pleasing to the deity. It's not like he won't accept your service, but it's not pleasing without contemplation on the well-being of others who are parts and parcels of the deity or parts and parcels of Krishna. So one can't. We're not Krishna. We can't maintain all living entities. Krishna can do that, but we can do some favorable service unto Krishna, unto the deity, by some Krishna-centered activity in relation to other living entities. Just like, there's a female duck. So we just ignore the female duck because she's just a female duck. And we're just worship the deity. Don't care about what happens to her and her eggs and the whole thing. So that's not pleasing to the deity. It's a subset of a life of one who's serving Krishna, and part of that serving Krishna, serving a deity, and then the other living entities, and so forth. Just like, your wife was describing how when she was in the hospital, this doctor and that nurse and this attendant and this person, he was conscious of introducing Krishna thought to persons that hadn't heard anything about Krishna. And not necessarily that, they're going to sign up and become a Hare Krishna member. But, it's a positive benefit for others to have that introduction, because everything starts somewhere. And then one of those persons, it's just repeating for everyone's benefit, one of the persons read one chapter of Bhagavad Gita and liked it. Now, I don't know what that means, what they liked it. But, and if it stops there, who knows? And if it goes beyond that, who knows? But we're not the controller of that. We're controller of doing some service unto others that's beneficial unto others according to their circumstance. I mean, I don't know what duck food is, but if there's some Krishna conscious prasadam that ducks can eat, that would be nice, along with putting up a sign saying keep away and leave this. Huh? Because she's got to eat. She ate. Okay, but I'm saying, if you're thinking, it's just the serving of the living entities. It's responsive to the question, and that's a subset of deity worship.
Yeah.
Okay, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Right.